Hello everyone, welcome back to session 10. In this video, we'll talk about HTTP request and fetch API. HTTP request is a message sent by a client to a server to request some action be taken on the server. It's a fundamental concept in web development and forms the backbone of communication on the internet. Basically, HTTP requests are everywhere. When you type a URL in your browser's address bar and press enter, your browser sends an HTTP GET request to the server hosting the website to retrieve the corresponding web page. When you go to a social media platform and fill in your login details and click on that login button, your browser sends an HTTP post request with the form data to the server to validate and then log you in. And finally, when you are pissed at some website and want to delete your account there, browser most likely will be making an HTTP delete call. Now, when different software application wants to communicate with each other, API comes in handy. API stands for Application Programming Interface. In simple terms, it's a set of rules and protocols that allows different software application to communicate with each other. Like how we communicate with other people using languages which has certain rule and constructs. API is that language rules and construct between software applications. And in JavaScript, fetch is a built-in function that allows you to make HTTP requests to server and handle the response. It provides a simple and modern way to interact with web services or APIs. And if you are using legacy browsers, it may not work directly. You will need to add polyfills to handle that. Now let's make some API calls using fetch. Let's start with a get API call. Okay. So get API call we are going to make to the this particular URL, users URL, which is exposed by JSON placeholder.tpcode.com. This is a mock API server which is hosted online. If you take this URL and just go to the browser and hit this URL, you'll see that it's returning back a list of objects, right? So whenever you are playing around with certain things, you can usually use this mock API servers which are online. One of them is basically JSON placeholder, which I like a lot. Now going back to the server, now let's make an API call using the fetch object, and this time let's create a async function and we call it get users, right? And inside this, let's add this piece of code. Now let me take a bit to make sure that you understand it correctly. So we are using this fetch object, right? And this fetch object is, let me remove this. So this fetch object is actually taking two arguments in place. One is the input or the URL, and second one is the init object, right? In this particular case, we have just passed in the URL, and because it was a get call, we don't need to pass in this init object. But in case if you want, if it is similar to this, right? So it is basically like that init object takes a method body and all those parameters which are actually utilized when we are going to have post put all those things. But in case of get, this is redundant, this is not required. But if you want to pass it just to make sure the code is more readable, you can do that. But I usually don't prefer it because it's the understanding, right, that whenever in fetch you are not passing a method, it is going to be a get method. Okay. So now fetch returns a promise, right? And when a promise is returned, you need to await it. That's what we learned in the last video, right? That we need to await that. Once you await that, the response came in, and let's just print the console, uh, print to console this response, what is coming, right? And before this, and let's go back. If you see here, okay, I didn't call the function, right? So now this time you see that it gave you back a bunch of things in the response. What I want you to look at is the status and the status text. Okay. Status is basically there are a lot of HTTP status codes which are defined, well defined status codes, right? So 2xx series is basically successful response. 3xx is that it needs to do certain more activities before it get can give you back the response. And 4xx series is that whatever input you have passed in, there is a there's something bad with it, right? So it's basically called as bad request response codes. And 5xx is that the service itself is down, right? There could be a problem with the service itself, so in that cases it will throw 5xx series. You can read more about it online about all the http status codes which are there, and it is very widely used when you are going to play around with these request api calls. Now, so we saw this is giving me a 200 response code. That means my response was successful. And now let's go back and uncomment this piece. And now you see that it is giving me the same response that I was seeing on the server, right? It is giving me all the objects from 1 to 10 IDs, right? And same thing I was able to see it on the server. It is printing till 1 to 10, right? That's the get users API. Now let's make a post API call, and let me comment this line, and let's make a post API call, right? Post is usually used to create a user, so I'll name it accordingly. So uh, let's say I made this, and let's pass in an email developer first at the rate, and let's call it dummy.com. And let's, here we need to also pass a header to explicitly say that our object is coming in a application.json object. And now when you got the response, let's first print the response. We'll also see that in a bit. And then after we convert that JSON object to a JSON object, then we print that into data. Again, one more thing is basically this response.json function. Response, we saw that it is giving you one like the complete response object, right? To read the body explicitly, you need to click do a dot json on that. And when you do a dot json on that, it is actually again a promise, and that's why there is a await in front of it. If you don't put await here, it is again a promise which is returned, and you will not be able to see the exact response which you are getting, right? And similarly here we have used the same thing. You see how we have defined here method as post and the body and the headers, right? Method as post is basically to make sure that the fetch api call understand that this is a post call. Body is basically what the request body of the object or the object that you want to pass to create a new user, right? So I need to pass in certain parameters, right? The name, username, email, those kind of properties. And header is basically showing that, saying that whatever content I have passed in my body is actually application json content, and with the character set of utf-8, right? So this is basically like all the nuances of using fetch api call, in which you need to define what type of url you want to post, right? So that defines a uniqueness of the resource itself. And then you define like what type of api call you want to make. Is it a get call, is it a post call, like that? And then the body in case if it is relevant, and the headers in case if they are relevant, right? And once you make that, now let's call create user. And this time you see that first thing, in this particular case it gave a status code of 201. 201 is basically created, right? And again it is 2xx series, that means it is all good. And finally the response that you got back is the same username and email and other information that you passed, with the explicit id information that defines the uniqueness of this object. Let's move to editing a user, right? So this time let's update a user, and updating a user is usually a put call. And in this time let's make it developer first to at the rate dummy.com. Utilizing Copilot because this is all redundant text. We don't need to go through all each and every detail here. So here I'll just put the ID as 11, right? So now I need to make an call to this function as well, right? So let's call update user. And once you do that, shows you that cannot read properties ID of undefined. Okay, this time you saw it gave back a 500 series, right? Let's make the user again as 1, and this time you see that it updated the id 1 with the values of these things. Name, username and email has been updated, and this time you are getting 200 series. Because we are using a mock server API, like create user will not actually get created, it's just a response back out of it. In case of actual servers, you will be able to put it in a database and then you will be able to use that, but in this case we will not be able to do that. And similarly you can do it for delete, patch, all those things. So while you are updating a user, you provided everything here, right? Patch is a request where you just want to update email corresponding to a specific property. You can just pass an email rather than passing the complete object. Okay. And delete is basically deleting that user. You just need to pass in the id of the user that you want to delete, and you don't need to pass in this body and headers, because delete is more like I want to completely get rid of this, right? So that is how the delete is going to work. Yeah. So mostly that's how you can utilize fetch API calls. And in this case, we have used await async methods only to do that for us. And when you need to do a, like last time also we discussed, right? All this to handle error handling should be put into try and catch block, so that whenever a failure happens, you get that error object back, and that error object is something that you can utilize to show an error to the user that okay, this error happened, and in case if it is a 400, then the user need to make any action around that. If it is a 500, then okay, you can retry, or you can reach out to us because there is some problem with the server that is going on, right? So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. See you in next video.